Welcome back. We have been discussing eccentrics, people we know and love, and we're actually reviewing the book Eccentrics, A Study of Sanity and Strangeness. Now, when we left, we had talked about sort of the non-conforming qualities, but also one of the characteristics of eccentrics is being very creative.
Oh, yeah.
You know, being willing to look at something and see how it could fit together maybe differently than other people might be able to see it. So there's kind of a need for stimulation, high need for stimulation, and being able to have a product. You mentioned concrete. That's sort of being able to take something and make something. It's very important.
Well, there's a man in this book, his name is Peter, and he has a secondary world. And I just loved this part of the book, where he has created a scale model of a town. And he spends all his days moving in trucks and delivering groceries and diesel fuel deliveries and turning on little lights and off and watering things. And he spends his whole day in this little world that he's created. He even creates the weather by making little,
he uses a
fan outside.
He uses a fan for wind.
And he didn't sound very happy to me. And they did point out that this was one of the few people in their study that didn't seem particularly happy. He was a loner, and this was his world. He had created this world. But he wasn't hurting anyone, and he was pretty happy. So hopefully the world will let him go on. I love that. I had this picture of sort of a, are you familiar with Wallace and Gromit, that British cartoon?
I love that.
Well, there's a documentary about the creator of that and how he moves all Wallace and Gromit all around their little sets and things. And I just thought, oh, these people should work together. I mean, they'd have a great time.
Well, and listening to that anecdote, I can see where our viewers might be thinking, well, he sounds pretty loony. You know, I mean, like, what would differentiate that as eccentric versus somebody who's has a thought disorder, or you know, and I think part of it has to do with the fact that this man is making a very clear choice in terms of spending his time. You know, when they interviewed him, he said he's very aware this isn't real. I mean, it's not like he thinks it's real and these are real people, but it's really sort of a place he'd rather go in terms of fantasy. Fantasy seemed a theme for a lot of this.
Yes, it did.
Very active, rich fantasy lives.
And really a strong need to kind of bring it more to the fore, have more fantasy and playfulness in one's life. As you pointed out, the 6 hobby horses. There's another gentleman in this book who runs the Martin Van Buren fan club after the 8th president, who most people think didn't do much as a president. So why this fan club? Well, this man thought all the presidents have a fan club. Martin should too. And he also dresses as a monk because it's comfortable. Another one of those people who dress for success in their own way.
Yes, that's right. He wears his little monk habit and he's quite comfortable with that.
I loved it.
Well, and part of this has to do with passion, which is, you know, when we talked about 6 different hobby horses, I mean, really talked about having a passionate sense of involvement with this. So it isn't just a side interest for people who are very committed emotionally to this. He did mention one of the other characteristics is strongly motivated by curiosity. So these are people who intend to need to know. You know, if they see something moving over there, they want to know what it is. I mean,
and they go right over, they bustle right over there, you know, because really it is far more interesting to find out what's off to the edge of the screen, so to speak, for a lot of people than really talking about the weather. You know, they're not interested in
small talk,
talking about the lawn and how the kids are doing, though they, of course, love their children. The Mitford family was prominently mentioned in this book. All those Mitford girls and their various adventures, and the father and mother, just really 2 eccentrics, class A eccentrics, you know, wealthy, half-educated, upper British class group, and these wild girls and their family and everything that would happen to them. So it was wonderful. I just loved that part of the book.
Well, it was kind of a collective reality they experienced. And you know, you bring up something important, which is often the difference between eccentric and mental illness always has been money. Which is, if I have the money to support my odd lifestyle,
My
then
500
I'm fine.
topiaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. That was another one, 500 topiaries. If I have the money to support that, then I have more options.
And they don't hurt anyone. Do you know what I mean? I mean, to me, that was the classic difference between what is a mental illness versus eccentricity. It seemed to me that, and really it's supported in this book, that these people don't hurt anybody. Maybe some of them are somewhat delusional, but their delusions aren't harmful to themselves or to others. They're not in danger, and et cetera, all those other things that we see.
That's right. That's right. They do talk about being, we mentioned, aware from early childhood of being different. And it was interesting, he said pretty much across the board, every single person he interviewed reported having an unhappy childhood. And actually that's not surprising in a way, because if I think about it, it must be for parents very difficult or confusing to have an eccentric child. I could see where there would be a lot of pressure on them to conform. What's wrong with you? Your brothers and sisters do it this way. The neighbors down the street are like this. What's wrong with you? So, and they reported a lot of that, that message, something's wrong with them simply because they were different. And feeling very unhappy about that.
And you can imagine the school system, not so much maybe these days where there's more acceptance of children learning at their own rate and being more creative, but you can imagine in the school system how the fight must have been to get this child to go along.
Yes.
And
be cooperative.
Right. What a waste of a perfectly good childhood, you know, and trying to be conforming, because they're going to grow up, they're going to be who they're going to be, and hopefully happy.
Well, in some ways, it seems to me that that may have been part of the preparation, though, for really being committed to their belief system. Because if I've had to justify and explain myself for many, many years, I mean, in some ways that makes me very solid in terms of my own identity. So that's probably one of the positive outcomes of that.
The testing, you're being tested.
Yes. Though I would also imagine that, and he talked about this in terms of the loner aspect, that it might very well convince you of your differentness to the point where you really don't feel like you're going to be understood. And in fact, you may not even expect it after a certain point, which is, nobody's going to get this. So I'm just going to do what I'm doing, you know, and not harm anybody. Okay, let's take a look at the next group of characteristics and see what we see. They're intelligent, opinionated and outspoken, convinced that you are right and the rest of the world is wrong, non-competitive, they don't need reassurance from the world, and unusual in eating habits or living arrangements. Okay, so that's another grouping that we have in terms of intelligent. That definitely, they all tested pretty high, average, above average, often in intelligence, and I think part of that is because they're, in some ways, I would guess that they've had to stretch themselves in terms of seeing things differently and making it fit, you know, maybe in new and unconventional ways.
Well, it was, and you know, they used a good example about an ordinary person who wanted to know about electricity would go to the library, but a person with this kind of intelligence and these kind of sort of nerve endings that go toward the creative would, yeah, they'd read a few books, but then they'd call PG&E and go look at the power generator, take a tour, knock on a physics professor's front door and ask a mixture of sort of naive and intellectual questions, and a very explorative style of learning. And there's an intuitive quality about that that was very enjoyable. It sounded like fun, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And it also sounded like pat answers we're simply not going to do. They did mention opinionated and outspoken. There's a sense that, and this probably also has to do with having explained themselves and justified their reality for a period of time, but he talks about the fact that sometimes they don't follow social norms. In the sense, the censoring seems to be different.
Yes,
sometimes, which is, if I think a thing, I'll tell you.
I don't think they value the social norms the way other less creative, less eccentric people do.
So there seems like an internal permission to just say it.
Say it.
You know, say what's on your mind.
Throw it out there, mix it all up, you know, and then stand back and watch it explode.
That's right, and watch what happens.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. You know, these are, most of these people are very charming, I would think, and would be really fun to have over, you know. Have them over for a barbecue and sit them down and talk. And I think they sound wonderful. As a matter of fact, I met a little eccentric the other day, a little 4-year-old eccentric who is the only child of 2 just regular type people here in San Jose. And these parents look at this child and they don't know what hit them. This child is a whirling dervish of energy. She has her own style. She appeared majestically attired for dinner with her wraparound shades, which she didn't want to take off for most of the meal, and just was charming, creative. And the rest of the family looks at this girl and they don't know where she came. And it was interesting, her father used the word eccentric, and I was reading this book.
She has her own style.
Oh,
for sure.
She does.
They are convinced that they're right and the rest of the world is wrong. And again, that sense of conviction. Not particularly interested in the company of others. This is our next graphic, which maybe we can take a look at before we have to close. One of the things that will come up in it is not particularly interested in the company of others, possessing a mischievous sense of humor. They tend to be single, the eldest or only child, and a bad speller, which he thought was interesting. It just wasn't expecting that, but it seemed to be something they all had in common, which is they were bad spellers. And that may again have to do with the fact that social norms are being appropriate.
And contained, and you know, it's that whole thing about drawing
in the lines.
In the lines, yeah. And
versus out, yep.
You know, the vagaries of most languages, I could see that most eccentrics would just, you know, pshaw. And thank goodness we have spell check now. I mean, it really makes a difference, I think.
Well, spell it like it sounds. Again, not particularly interested in the company of others, and yet they do have that sense of humor. So I think he said often it wasn't, it was more of a dry humor or rather sly. So if you listened, you begin to hear their view of the world and how funny it often is, and their observations and how funny they are.
And their constructs are very, very witty.
Yeah, so that whole business of, again, probably used to operating as so self-contained, but apparently do have the ability to connect socially when called upon.
Yes, I think they can, and I think a lot of them are operating just fine. They find a niche in the system that works for them, and they make their living and, you know, have their life and lead very happy lives.
Did it surprise you they were single?
Not really. It didn't really surprise me. I think it would be unusual for an eccentric to find someone who could tolerate a lot of their eccentricities. It would take a very understanding, nurturing person. So hopefully they will find those people. I found that relatively understandable, that it would be tough to link. Eccentrics are not joiners. They tend to be loners.
Okay, we're going to need to close, but I want to thank you so much for making time to come in and talk about this delightful book. I encourage you to give it a read. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tune in next week when we explore spiritual counseling and its role in a world dominated by managed care. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.
For topic suggestions, write to Bay Area Psychology.